She crossed the room naked, crawled onto me, and smiled. HFY Reddit. Eli Mercer had never felt truly at home in the vast space station orbiting the pale blue planet. It was a neutral research hub, a place where humans and other species shared knowledge and experiments. Yet Eli always felt a subtle tension in the air, as if he were constantly being measured. The station was quiet at night, the hum of engines and distant lights the only companions to his thoughts. Most species aboard were strict and formal, speaking in tones that humans often found cold. Eli had been trained to observe and respect every rule, yet a strange unease had grown inside him since he had arrived. Tonight was different. He had stayed late in his quarters, reviewing data on the neurological responses of alien species to human emotional stimuli. The reports were fascinating, yet a lingering discomfort clung to him. He wondered why humans were so different. On his planet, emotions were messy, raw, sometimes overwhelming, but here they seemed both dangerous and mesmerizing to the others. Eli had learned to control himself, to mask his feelings, yet he sensed that something in him always slipped through. The door to his quarters opened without warning. He turned quickly, startled, and saw a figure step into the light. She moved with a calm that belied the intrusion. Lyra, a researcher from a species known for their emotional restraint, was standing there. Her skin shimmered softly under the artificial lights, and she was completely unclothed by her culture's standards. Eli's mind raced. Was this an attack, a test, or a cultural ritual he did not yet understand? Lyra's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. She smiled, a small gesture that held no threat, only observation. Eli froze, unsure of what to do. His training told him to act with caution, to keep distance, to never allow a non-human species to exploit human instinct. Yet here she was, completely vulnerable, her presence demanding attention. Slowly, she stepped closer. Eli could feel the air shift, the subtle vibrations of her movements sending tiny tremors across the floor. She crouched slightly, and in a motion that was both deliberate and careful, moved closer to where Eli sat at his console. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, but no words came. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, yet Eli found himself unable to move, trapped between instinct and protocol. His mind wandered briefly to the data he had been studying. Humans had a unique way of responding to trust and vulnerability. The observers had recorded how even minor displays of openness could trigger empathy and bonding across species. Could this be what Lyra intended? The thought made Eli's heart beat faster. The room felt smaller, tighter, charged with a tension he had never experienced before. He tried to focus on logic. Lyra's species were known for studying emotions scientifically. Perhaps this was part of her research, a test of human reaction. Yet something in her movements suggested a deeper awareness. She was not here to provoke fear, not truly. She wanted to observe him, see how a human reacted under conditions no human normally faced. Eli realized then that his reaction, his hesitation, was exactly what she wanted to see. The alarms in the station flickered briefly, a low hum cutting through the silence. Lights dimmed for a moment, and in that flicker, Eli saw a different side of Lyra. Her eyes, always calm, now seemed to reflect the light differently, sharper, almost calculating. He wondered if the interruption was part of the experiment or just a coincidence. His training told him to be alert, yet his curiosity, his human instinct to understand, held him in place. He remembered the other species' warnings about humans: unpredictable, emotionally volatile, dangerous in ways they could not fully comprehend. And yet, here he was, facing one of the most controlled and disciplined beings in the galaxy, and feeling a pull he could not name. It was not attraction in the usual sense. It was something deeper, something ancient in the human psyche that responded to trust and vulnerability. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Eli tried to remember the protocols, the advice given by his superiors. Do not allow yourself to be manipulated. Maintain professional distance. Observe without reaction. Yet every fiber of his being rebelled against the detachment. He was human, and humans were wired to respond, to connect, to care. And that care, that empathy, was what made humans both powerful and dangerous. Lyra shifted slightly, a movement so subtle that Eli almost missed it. She smiled again, not in flirtation but in a way that suggested understanding. She knew him, understood the human mind better than he understood himself. Eli felt a rush of realization. This was no random encounter. She had chosen this moment, chosen him. His instincts told him to be wary, yet his heart told him to watch, to learn, to experience. In that quiet room, surrounded by the soft hum of the station and the distant stars beyond the viewports, Eli faced a choice. He could retreat into protocol and training, deny the instincts that made him human, and follow the rules set by his superiors. Or he could allow himself to observe, to feel, to engage with what was happening, understanding that this moment was part of something far larger than himself. As he made the decision, a subtle shift occurred in the room. The air seemed lighter yet heavier, charged with energy that was almost tangible. Eli realized that whatever experiment was unfolding, he was at its center. Lyra, with her calm and controlled presence, was both the conductor and the observer. He, in turn, was both subject and participant. His mind raced with questions. Why humans? Why him? What did the observers hope to learn from this encounter? And yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, he felt a strange clarity. Humans had a way of changing the rules simply by being human. Their empathy, their courage, their willingness to trust could alter even the most rigid systems. And perhaps, he thought, that was why he had been chosen for this moment. The flicker of the station lights passed, leaving the room in steady glow once more. Eli's pulse slowed, and he allowed himself to breathe, to observe, to process. Lyra remained still, her eyes never leaving his, her presence both a challenge and a lesson. He understood then that this was not about desire, not about conquest or intimacy in the conventional sense. This was about connection, about understanding the human capacity for trust and empathy in ways that other species had never experienced. He thought of the reports, the data, the quiet warnings. Humans were unpredictable, dangerous, and yet here he was, demonstrating exactly why. Not through force, not through logic, but through the simple act of observation, of feeling, of being fully human in a moment that demanded it. The door to his quarters remained closed, the corridor outside silent. The stars outside shimmered cold and distant. And yet, within the small room, the universe felt wide and full, as if the boundaries of space and culture had momentarily shifted. Eli understood that this night, this encounter, would change not only his understanding of his own species, but potentially the way humans were seen across the galaxy. He watched Lyra, noting the precision of her movements, the intelligence in her gaze. And in that observation, he found his own humanity reflected back at him in a way he had never anticipated. The fear, the uncertainty, the tension, all of it was a part of being human, and it was precisely what made him and his species unique. The silence stretched, filled with unspoken communication, with the weight of knowledge and the spark of something new. Eli realized that this moment, seemingly simple, would ripple far beyond the walls of his quarters, beyond the orbiting station, and perhaps even beyond the stars themselves. And as he finally spoke, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts inside him, he said the only words he could, a greeting, simple and human, acknowledging her presence, her purpose, and the extraordinary unfolding of trust and observation that had brought them to this point. The smile on Lyra's face deepened, not in emotion, but in recognition, as if she had known all along that this response would come. The room remained quiet, the hum of the station constant, Yet something fundamental had shifted. Eli understood then that he had passed the first test, not through compliance or cleverness, but through the most human of actions: presence, awareness, and the courage to engage with the unknown. The night stretched on, long and filled with potential, and Eli knew that nothing aboard the station, or perhaps in the galaxy, would ever be the same again. The observers watched in complete silence as the data streamed across their hidden consoles. From their concealed chamber beyond normal space, they recorded every breath, every shift of posture, every change in heart rhythm. To them, Eli Mercer was not just a human. He was a variable, a living example of something they could not fully control. Lyra exited his quarters only after enough time had passed to ensure the encounter had settled into memory. She walked through the corridor with steady steps, her posture unchanged, her expression neutral. Other beings glanced at her but did not question her presence. Everything had been authorized far above the level of station command. What none of them knew was how important the results already were. Inside his quarters, Eli sat alone. The silence felt heavier now. His thoughts replayed the encounter again and again, searching for meaning. He felt no shame, no excitement in the way others might expect. Instead, he felt aware, exposed, as if a mirror had been held up to his inner self by a species that barely understood emotions at all. He returned to his work, but the data no longer felt abstract. Every line of information carried new weight. Charts describing emotional response curves now felt personal. Humans reacted to vulnerability with instinctive care. That care created bonds. Bonds created loyalty. Loyalty created actions that could not be predicted by pure logic. This was what frightened the others. Elsewhere on the station, Lyra entered a secure research chamber. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss. Light panels adjusted to her species' preference. She stood still as the observers addressed her through layered sound and image. They asked precise questions. Did the human display aggression? Did he attempt dominance? Did he withdraw? Lyra answered calmly. The human did none of those things. He observed. He hesitated. He acknowledged her presence without fear or rejection. This response was marked as significant. The observers exchanged signals at speeds Eli's species could never perceive. The experiment was already exceeding projections. Their concern was not physical contact. It was psychological alignment. Humans aligned easily, too easily. When exposed to another being's vulnerability, they adjusted themselves instinctively. This adjustment did not weaken them. It strengthened them, and it changed the other party as well. Eli noticed the change the next day. Conversations lingered longer. Simple greetings turned into exchanges of personal experience. A technician spoke about missing their home world. A medical officer admitted fear of long-term isolation. Eli listened. He responded honestly. He did not realize that this was unusual. To him, it was normal human behavior. Each interaction was logged. Each emotional exchange triggered neural shifts in non-human minds. Patterns emerged quickly. Exposure to humans increased emotional tolerance. It reduced aggression. It created preference. Preference became attachment. Lyra observed from a distance as others approached Eli more often. She felt something unfamiliar in her own thoughts, a curiosity that was no longer clinical. The observers noted this with alarm. One subject influencing many had been expected. One subject influencing a researcher had not. At a higher level, councils gathered. Beings of logic, order, and long planning debated what humanity represented. Humans did not dominate through force. They did not manipulate through deception. They changed others simply by being present and genuine. This made them impossible to classify. Some argued for isolation. Humans were a destabilizing element. Others argued for control. If humans could be directed, they could serve as tools. A third faction raised a troubling possibility. Humans were not tools. They were catalysts. Back on the station, Eli felt watched, not in a threatening way but in the sense that something larger was unfolding around him. He adjusted his behavior, trying to remain professional, but the truth was simple. He could not stop being human. Lyra approached him again in a public space. This time she was fully dressed. Her tone was formal, but her eyes lingered longer than required. She thanked him for his cooperation. Eli nodded, unsure what he had cooperated with. When she left, several nearby researchers watched him with expressions they did not yet understand themselves. The observers recorded a spike in collective emotional variance. One human had altered the equilibrium of a multi-species station in less than a single cycle. This exceeded all prior projections. A directive was issued. A full evaluation vote would be scheduled. Humanity would be assessed not as an ally or enemy, but as a force of change. The outcome would determine whether humans would be welcomed deeper into galactic society or quietly pushed to the edges of known space. Eli stood by a viewport that night, watching stars drift past. He felt a sense of responsibility he could not explain. Somewhere beyond the walls of the station, decisions were being made about his species. He did not know the rules of this test, only that he was part of it. Lyra watched him from afar. For the first time in her life, her thoughts were not perfectly ordered. A small disruption echoed through her mind. It was not fear. It was not logic. It was the beginning of something her people had no word for. The observers marked the moment carefully. The experiment had moved into a phase none of them fully understood. And for the first time in their long history, they were no longer certain they were in control. The station no longer felt the same to Eli Mercer. He could not point to a single change, no broken rule or altered schedule, yet something subtle had shifted. The corridors felt warmer. Conversations carried more pauses, more meaning. Eyes lingered when he spoke. He had become a quiet center without trying to be. He still followed protocol. He still completed reports and attended briefings. But between tasks, others found reasons to be near him. A logistics officer asked his opinion on music. A scientist shared a memory from their early training. None of it felt unusual to Eli. Humans talked. Humans shared. That was how they survived long distances and long nights. What Eli did not see were the charts updating in restricted chambers. Emotional variance curves rose steadily. Conflict probability dropped. Social clustering began to form around the human presence. The observers watched with growing concern. Humanity was not spreading influence through intention. It was spreading it through existence. Lyra reviewed the data herself. She had been ordered to maintain distance, yet her thoughts kept returning to the first encounter. She analyzed her own neural patterns and found irregularities, not errors, changes. The human had altered her baseline. This should not have been possible. Her species valued control above all else. Emotion was something to be studied, not experienced. Yet when she observed Eli interacting with others, she felt an unfamiliar pull. He did not dominate conversations. He did not demand attention. He listened. And in listening, he created space for others to reveal themselves. That revelation was dangerous. A minor incident occurred in one of the laboratories. Two researchers from different species disagreed on a procedural adjustment. Voices rose, stress indicators spiked. Normally, security would intervene. Instead, Eli happened to be nearby. He did not choose sides. He asked questions. He acknowledged both concerns. Within minutes, the conflict dissolved. The observers flagged the incident immediately. Human mediation without authority. Conflict resolution without command. This behavior undermined hierarchical control structures that had governed interstellar society for centuries. Eli later wondered why everyone thanked him. He had done nothing special. He had simply treated them like people. At the council level, debates intensified. One faction argued that humans must be limited in number and exposure. Another suggested assigning humans to controlled environments where their influence could be monitored. A smaller group warned that restricting humans would only prove their importance. The most troubling conclusion was this: humans inspired choice, and choice led to change. Lyra was summoned to a private meeting with Eli. This time there were no hidden observers in the room, only sensors embedded deep within the station itself. She spoke carefully, explaining that humans were being studied not for their technology but for their psychological impact. Eli listened quietly. When she finished, he did not react with anger or pride. He felt something closer to sadness. He asked a simple question. "Why does caring frighten you so much?" The question was recorded. The observers paused analysis for several milliseconds, an eternity by their standards. Lyra could not answer immediately. She had no prepared response. Instead, she told him the truth. Because caring creates attachment. Attachment creates loss. Loss creates pain. Her people had chosen long ago to avoid pain by avoiding attachment. Eli nodded. He told her humans had tried the same thing many times. It never worked. Avoiding pain also avoided meaning. That statement spread through the data network like a shockwave. After the meeting, Eli noticed a change in Lyra. Her posture softened. Her gaze no longer felt purely analytical. She was changing, and she knew it. That frightened her more than any human weapon ever could. The station continued to shift. Shared meals became common. Silence became comfortable instead of tense. Species that had never collaborated before began exchanging ideas freely. Productivity increased. Emotional resilience increased. The observers reached a grim conclusion. Humanity was not a destabilizing force in the short term. It was a transformational one in the long term. A preliminary vote was called. The outcome was divided. No final decision could be reached without further evidence. One final phase would be required. Eli received a notice requesting his presence at a future council session. The language was polite. The meaning was heavy. He would represent his species not through argument but through example. Standing alone once more at the viewport, Eli felt the weight settle in his chest. He had not asked to become important. He had only been himself, and somehow that had been enough to change everything. Behind the walls, beyond sight and sound, the observers prepared for the final test. Humanity would soon be judged not by its power but by its heart. The council session was held in a chamber that seemed larger than the station itself. Eli Mercer entered with a calm he did not entirely feel. Around him sat beings of every shape, color, and size. Eyes without irises, appendages that flexed in unfamiliar ways, faces devoid of expression. All of them waited, their attention fixed on the human in their midst. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. They were not here to discuss trade, technology, or resource allocation. They were here to assess the potential of a species they barely understood. And now, he realized, the outcome of their deliberation could shape countless worlds. Lyra stood nearby, her posture formal but slightly less rigid than usual. She had been chosen to accompany him, to explain cultural nuances and clarify protocol. Eli appreciated her presence, even though he sensed the inner turmoil she did not show. He could see that the human effect was no longer limited to her species. It had begun to ripple outward, touching every observer, every participant in the chamber. The discussion began. Words were exchanged in a language Eli could understand only partially. Concepts too abstract for human minds were debated. He focused on listening, not reacting. He had no desire to dominate the conversation. He needed to convey humanity simply, truthfully, and clearly. After a period of formal debate, Lyra translated the council's question into simple terms. Would humanity's presence in the wider galaxy be constructive or destructive? Would humans stabilize or destabilize the existing order? Eli took a deep breath. He spoke slowly, deliberately, choosing every word with care. He described what humans were at their core: beings who felt deeply, who experienced fear and hope, who sought connection. He told them that humans did not conquer merely through strength, nor manipulate through cunning. They acted through empathy, loyalty, and trust. He paused. The chamber remained silent. Even beings accustomed to millennia of controlled emotion were still listening. He continued, explaining that humans knew fear, but they did not allow it to dictate action. They faced uncertainty not with cold calculation alone, but with courage and collaboration. They forged bonds that transformed weakness into strength. And he concluded it was precisely this unpredictability, this ability to inspire change without coercion, that defined humans. The chamber hummed with low vibrations. No one spoke. Eli felt the eyes of countless species upon him. Then one being, a tall figure with translucent skin and limbs like flowing ribbons, spoke. Its tone was neither angry nor approving. It asked, "How can we trust that this is not dangerous?" Eli smiled faintly. He admitted openly that humans could make mistakes. They could cause harm through misunderstanding or carelessness. Yet he explained the same capacity for error allowed them to grow, to learn, to correct themselves. The key was choice, and choice led to responsibility. Another voice, cold and analytical, challenged him further. Could humans be guided? Could their influence be limited? Eli answered honestly. Humans could be guided but never fully controlled. Any attempt to suppress their empathy or curiosity would be counterproductive. But if their presence was met with respect and openness, the results were almost always positive. He looked at Lyra, who nodded subtly. She had been given freedom to observe and translate, yet she understood the gravity of his words. Eli's words were not strategy. They were humanity laid bare, raw, imperfect, and yet full of potential. For hours, the council deliberated in silence after his presentation. The chamber emptied except for a few key members who conferred privately. Lyra returned to Eli's side and explained that the vote would be final in a cycle. Humanity's future would be decided not by reports or data alone, but by the impression left by one human willing to embody the best of his species. During the night, Eli could not sleep. He wandered the observation decks, staring at stars that stretched across space like silver threads. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here: quiet moments in his quarters, subtle interactions with alien colleagues, the invisible influence that humans carried simply by being themselves. He thought of Lyra, not as a test subject, not as a colleague, but as a being transformed in part by the human presence she had encountered. The realization made his chest tighten. Change had begun, and it could not be undone. The council reconvened the next day. Eli and Lyra entered, knowing that this was the final phase. Votes were cast. Observers recorded neural activity, emotional responses, and microexpressions. Silence fell over the chamber as the tally was counted. Then the chair of the council, a being whose voice resonated like wind through crystal, spoke. Humanity is acknowledged as a stabilizing yet transformative force. The chamber erupted, not in cheers, but in a wave of quiet acknowledgement. Decisions were made, rules adjusted, policies rewritten. Humans would be integrated into galactic society, not merely tolerated, but allowed to interact freely, their presence a catalyst for evolution across species. Eli felt a surge of relief and awe. He realized the magnitude of what had occurred. A single species, judged not by weapons or strategy, but by the essence of its humanity, had passed the ultimate test. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would he. Lyra stepped forward. Her eyes held something Eli had never seen: recognition of emotion, of change, of connection. She said nothing, but her presence communicated what words could not. Eli understood. The human effect was now undeniable, not just measured in charts and reports, but in the hearts and minds of those around him. The station, once a quiet place of observation and control, buzzed with new energy. Collaboration, creativity, and trust blossomed among species that had long avoided such exchanges. And at the center of it all stood Eli Mercer, a simple human who had shown the galaxy the power of empathy, courage, and connection. As he gazed out at the stars, he knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity's journey among the stars was just starting, and the ripple effects of their presence would be felt across worlds and generations. He was not a conqueror, not a hero in the traditional sense. He was simply a human being, and that had changed everything. Eli Mercer returned to his quarters after the council decision, the weight of the moment settling gently on his shoulders. The station felt different now. The quiet corridors no longer seemed tense. They were filled with subtle warmth, a sense of potential waiting to be realized. Every being he passed acknowledged him, not with deference but with recognition. He had done nothing extraordinary by standard measures, and yet, somehow, he had changed everything. He sat by the viewport, staring at the endless stars. Each one seemed brighter, more alive, as if reflecting the new energy that humans brought to the galaxy. He thought of the reports, the data, and the long hours of analysis, but now they seemed distant. What mattered was not the charts, but the connections, the choices, the empathy that humans could offer. That simple essence, so often underestimated, had proven powerful beyond measure. Lyra appeared beside him. She did not speak at first. Instead, she simply watched him, her eyes conveying understanding and acknowledgement. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. The human had shown her something her people had long denied themselves, the courage to feel, to connect, and to accept vulnerability. Eli turned to her and spoke softly. He thanked her for guiding him, for helping him navigate cultures and rules he could never fully understand. Lyra nodded. Her expression was thoughtful. She admitted that observing him had changed her more than she anticipated. Her people valued logic and control, yet they had witnessed a human being alter the course of the station simply through presence and empathy. Over the following weeks, Eli noticed subtle shifts throughout the station. Species that had never shared ideas or collaborated now engaged openly, exchanging knowledge and experiences. Tensions that had simmered for decades began to ease. Researchers sought him out not for guidance, but for the simple clarity that came from observing a human willing to listen and understand. It was as if the human presence itself had become a stabilizing force, fostering trust and cooperation. Even the observers who had been the most cautious were affected. Their analysis showed that humans catalyzed change without coercion. The very act of being human, vulnerable, compassionate, and courageous, was reshaping the social fabric of the station. This was not domination. It was influence through empathy, a force the galaxy had never truly encountered before. Eli reflected on the journey. He had not sought recognition, nor had he intended to sway councils or alter civilizations. He had simply acted with honesty, presence, and humanity. And that had been enough. He realized that the essence of humans lay not in power or strategy, but in the ability to inspire trust, to create bonds, and to face uncertainty with courage. One evening, he returned to the observation deck with Lyra. The two stood together, watching stars drift past, each one a distant sun, each one a potential world touched by the ripples of human influence. Eli spoke quietly, acknowledging the unknown, the potential for both joy and danger. He reminded Lyra that humans were not perfect. Mistakes could be made, pain could come, yet the choice to care, to connect, and to act with courage defined them. Lyra listened, absorbing each word. She understood now that humans were not simply another species to be studied, contained, or controlled. They were catalysts, capable of inspiring change in ways logic and planning could never predict. And in that understanding, she felt something her people had long suppressed: hope. The station continued to thrive. Collaboration between species grew deeper, scientific discovery accelerated, and trust became the foundation of interaction. Eli's influence, subtle yet profound, had created a new model for coexistence, one built not on fear or control, but on empathy and understanding. Humans, by their nature, had brought transformation without conflict, demonstrating that the essence of a species could alter the course of civilizations. Eli and Lyra often reflected together, quietly, on what had been achieved. They spoke of potential, of the paths humanity could take, and the ways in which empathy and courage could continue to shape galactic society. They did not need words to convey the depth of change. The station itself hummed with the results, a living testament to what had been accomplished. And as Eli gazed once more at the endless expanse of stars, he understood a profound truth. Humans were not conquerors, not invaders, not rulers. They were a force of connection, a reminder that courage, empathy, and trust could reach across species and reshape the galaxy. That simple truth, lived fully and openly, had the power to change worlds. The journey was only beginning. Humanity's presence in the stars would continue to ripple outward, touching lives and civilizations in ways that could not be predicted. And in the quiet, reflective moments between duty and discovery, Eli Mercer knew that being human, fully and authentically human, was enough to make a difference that no technology, weapon, or calculation could ever achieve.